Right now, somewhere in your body, an alarm is quietly ringing. You can't hear it, you can't feel it, but it's there, running in the background, and it thinks you're about to starve. It's not wrong because you're weak. It's wrong because it's old. Ancient, actually. Your body is still bracing for a famine that ended 10,000 years ago. Think about the last time you skipped a meal. Maybe you got irritable. Maybe your hands felt shaky. Maybe all you could think about was food, even when you weren't that hungry. That wasn't a character flaw. That was a survival system firing exactly as designed. Here's the strange part. That system was built for a world that no longer exists. For most of human history, food wasn't guaranteed. Not weekly, not even monthly. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have found that feast and famine cycled constantly, sometimes with weeks of scarcity between successful hunts. Your ancestors didn't know where their next meal was coming from, so their bodies adapted. They learned to survive uncertainty by preparing for the worst, always. This is where the science gets interesting. In 1944, a researcher named Ansel Keys ran what's now called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. He wanted to understand what happens to the human body and mind under prolonged food restriction. He took a group of healthy young men and cut their food intake dramatically for 6 months. What he found changed how we understand hunger forever. The men didn't just lose weight. They became obsessed with food. They dreamed about it. They collected recipes. Some hid food in their pockets, even though they knew they'd eat it later. Their metabolism slowed to protect them. Their mood darkened. Their focus narrowed until food was almost the only thing their minds could hold. Sound familiar? That's not just what happens during extreme starvation. It's a smaller, quieter version of what happens every time you diet, skip meals, or restrict what you eat. Your brain doesn't know the difference between an intentional calorie deficit and a famine. It just knows food is scarce, and it responds the same ancient way every time. Why would evolution build something so extreme? Because for most of human history, being extreme was the only thing that worked. A body that panicked at scarcity and stored fat quickly during abundance was a body more likely to survive winter, drought, or a bad hunting season. The genes that made you anxious about food weren't a defect. They were, in the truest sense, a gift from ancestors who almost starved and lived to pass those genes on. In the 1960s, a geneticist named James Neal proposed something called the Thrifty gene hypothesis. His idea was simple. Populations that experienced repeated famine would evolve efficient metabolisms, ones that stored energy aggressively whenever food was available. It made perfect sense for a world of scarcity. But we don't live in that world anymore. Most people reading this have food available within a 10-minute walk, at almost any hour, in nearly unlimited quantity. Your environment changed in the blink of an evolutionary eye. Your biology didn't get the memo. This mismatch has a name. Researchers call it evolutionary mismatch, when an adaptation that once kept you alive now works against you because the world moved faster than your genes could follow. Harvard evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman has spent years studying this exact gap. His research points to something almost poetic. Your body isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning perfectly for a world that no longer exists. That's why willpower alone so often fails against hunger. You're not fighting a lack of discipline. You're fighting millions of years of programming that once meant the difference between life and death. Consider what happens the moment you decide to eat less. Within hours, hormone levels shift. Ghrelin, sometimes called the hunger hormone, rises. Leptin, the hormone that tells your brain you're full, can drop. Your body senses the deficit and interprets it exactly the way it would have 100,000 years ago, as a warning sign of famine. It doesn't know you're trying to fit into old genes. It doesn't know there's a grocery store 2 blocks away stocked with more food than your ancestors would see in a lifetime. All it knows is less energy coming in than expected. And its ancient instructions say one thing: prepare, store, crave. This is also why certain foods feel almost impossible to resist. Sugar and fat were once rare and valuable, dense sources of energy that could mean survival during hard times. Your brain rewards you for eating them, hard, because for most of human history, that reward kept you alive. Today, those same foods sit on every corner, engineered to be more concentrated and available than anything your ancestors ever encountered. Your ancient reward system hasn't caught up. It still treats a donut like buried treasure. So, what do you do with a body this outdated? You stop treating hunger and cravings as failures of character. They're not signals that something is wrong with you. They're signals that something very old inside you is doing exactly what it was built to do, in a world it was never built for. Understanding this doesn't mean giving up on health or discipline. It means working with your biology instead of against it. Extreme restriction often backfires precisely because it mimics famine too closely, triggering the same primal alarm systems that made the Minnesota volunteers dream about food for months. Gentler, more consistent approaches tend to work better, not because they're morally superior, but because they don't set off the ancient alarm in the first place. There's something almost humbling in all this. The same instincts that once saved your ancestors from starving to death in a hard winter are the instincts making it difficult for you to walk past a bakery today. You are not broken. You are the living result of survivors built by scarcity, dropped into abundance. Next time your stomach growls an hour after lunch, or you find yourself thinking about food longer than you'd like to admit, remember what's actually happening. That's not weakness talking. That's 10,000 years of survival wisdom still running, still convinced that famine could be right around the corner. Because somewhere in your body, an alarm is quietly ringing. And it's not broken. It's just still waiting for a famine that already ended.